Ways and Means full committee meeting, and this is our third last meeting before crossover day, so there's probably going to be a fourth, but I hope not. We're first going to hear House Bill 408. Chairman Willard, if you would present the bill, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can please remain in my seat, I'll present it. This bill is brought as a result of two cities in Fulton County which have a hotel-motel tax. Those cities are Sandy Springs and Johns Creek. To give a brief history to the committee, back in 1991, there was a provision added to the hotel-motel tax, which is written into the bill that you have before you as Section 5A1. And this permitted the collection of a hotel-motel tax in the city of Atlanta and Fulton County, which was at 7%. And the purpose of the tax, of course, as all of them are, they have for the tourism, some going to the local government, and then a portion of it is earmarked for the purpose of other projects. In this case, the law was drafted specifically for the purpose of having that other project to be the construction of a dome for the National Football League, and it provided for that sum of tax to be a 39.3% of the total revenue collected. Come forward, there was the money was used as a matter of funding bonds, or portion of the bonds that were needed for the construction of the dome. And now coming forward, that dome, as everyone is aware, is being demolished or will be demolished, and there is a process now of building a new stadium. The new stadium will not be one in which these two cities to the north, Johns Creek and Sandy Springs, are participants, but the cities have honored and continued the payment obligations for the current bonds, which are now sometime this year we believe to be retired. And the law does not speak as to how that revenue can then be used by these two cities. Therefore, the bill is brought to bring an amendment, which is started on line 88 as subsection C of the law, and it recognizes that first these bonds have to be retired, but then that 39.3% could then be used for what we call tourism product development, which is defined in the law under paragraph 6 of Code Section 4813-50.2. And that, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is a list of numerous things. I think it's about 11 or 12 items long, but it all addresses local governments having used these funds for specific projects to support and encourage tourism. The cities will be doing as all other local governments do in the use of those funds. It has to authorize specifically that purpose under the law for the expenditure of the monies. That is the reason for the bill being brought, Mr. Chairman. Has come through the subcommittee with unanimous support, and I ask for favorable consideration by the full committee.
Well, it's been so long since the subcommittee considered this, maybe they have forgotten. You want to explain it a little further?
I'll be happy to answer questions.
Are there questions of the author? Seeing no questions, what's the pleasure?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Do pass. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. It's moved on to rules. You may. Yes, sir. House Bill 243, Representative Hamilton. Should be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. There we go. I bring before you House Bill 243, just passed out of subcommittee. This is a bill, the title of the bill, we call it the Education Savings Account Act. Basically what it does is it operates very similar to a spending health account, medical account. and it takes determines a qualification or eligibility for students and gives parents the ability to have a consumer-driven parental control opportunity to provide them with parental choice. It creates this account. This account deals only with the state dollars, the state portion, and for those of you that are not aware of that, that's probably an average of about $4,400 per student at the state level. It is a range of anywhere from $3,500 to $5,000, depending on the student in the school district that they're in. It's important also to recognize this has nothing to do with the local dollars. Those local dollars stay there. It also, the way it's counted, any of the federal dollars that may or may not be associated with that child stay there in the local school district. But it creates a savings account or a spending account, however you want to call it. It allows GOSA to set up through a financial institution where this money is deposited on a quarterly basis. It's the only students that are eligible are those that meet the qualifications.
Let me interrupt you for a minute. For those of us who don't understand acronyms, tell us about GOSA.
GOSA is the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, and so they would, thank you for clarification, I've had to learn some of these acronyms myself. But that money goes into that account on a quarterly basis. If the student is approved, one of the main qualifications, and we've changed it, but this bill right here is you have to have been in the public school system for 2 full FTE counts, so basically 1 year. You've been there 1 year as part of the qualification. And if you're qualified, this money goes into the account, and then it's directed as a consumer account. The parent then has the ability to direct the spending of that account and actually spend the money. And the two most logical choices would be if you choose to go to a private school, the parent can use that money to pay towards the tuition of that private school should they choose. Another thing is they can also contract back with private or public schools that have digital learning, career academies, that type of thing. So you're really given a menu of choices to that parent. So it's not that it just has to go to that private school if they so choose. It can also be used for various types of testing, for training, a whole host of other opportunities. The other option is that the parent has the opportunity, if they so choose, to homeschool that child. And so if they homeschool that child, then they have the ability to take those dollars and use them for approved curriculum, again, online training, testing, that type of thing. And there's accountability put into the provision. We're keeping the same criteria that is currently being used in homeschooling as well as the special needs scholarship. So there's no change in that. They still have to meet that criteria. GOSA will also have a requirement to post results from this and a whole host of other things. Don't know how much detail you want to go into. But from the first time we presented this bill, we've made probably close to 20 amendments to this to get it down to a point. The most recent one, there was a concern of a fiscal note responsibility or a fiscal impact, and the way it's currently set up, we've removed the kindergarten as well as the first grade ability to move right in. And so because you have to be in the public school for 1 year, then there truly is no fiscal impact on the state, because the state's already paying those dollars, and they simply follow that child to the parent for them to use it in their best interest. And another provision of it is there's a rollover provision. So because we believe in the parent, giving the parent the opportunity to choose those dollars wisely. So if for some reason, if we want to take a round number for simple math, if we want to take that the $4,000 was put into that account, and for some reason that parent is able to save and scrimp and not spend $4,000, and let's say there's $200 left over at the end of the year, that $200 would roll over to be applied to the account the following year, and it continues to do that. The only exception is when you graduate high school, any money that might be there, and again, we want to encourage the parents to be good stewards of the resources, of the taxpayers' dollars. Should there be money left at the end of K-12, then you have the ability to roll over up to the most recent amount that was allocated to that account over. So basically 1 year's funding. You have the ability to roll that into college or post-high school training and education. I think that's the basics of what the bill does, and I'd be happy to answer any questions of the committee members.
Are there similar programs in existence in any other states?
Thank you. There are, Arizona passed similar legislation 3 years ago. We have the benefit of learning from some of the startup challenges that Arizona did. Florida, so they've operated three years there. Florida did this a year ago. They've done their first year. They also learned some things from Arizona, made some changes, and we've learned some things. And so we think the bill has several of those, I guess, safeguards and things that they've learned to be able to move the bill forward. There's currently, I believe, about a dozen states right now, like us, that are actively looking at this legislation, this type of legislation.
Are there limitations at all? I mean, is this sort of like a pilot project that it grows into, or?
Thank you very much. What we decided was in the first, because there was a concern, especially with the kindergarten and first grade, there was a concern that there might be a mass number. So we wanted to ease people's concerns. So in the first year of the program, we said we would limit it to 0.5% of the student population. Pretty low number. Now that you might say, well, how many is that? That equates to approximately 8,500 students using the current count. The second year, it would be limited to 1%, which right now, using the same math, that's about 17,000. And in the third year, the cap would be removed. But it's important to understand those caps apply only to people moving into the program that are currently in the public school system anyway.
Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hamilton, you mentioned that there's no fiscal impact. Are you suggesting or saying that if a student is not enrolled today in a public school, they can enter a public school for a year and then be eligible for the scholarship?
That's correct. And what I mean by there's no impact is the fact that the state, based on that, the state would already be funding that particular state portion for that student. And so the simple reality is that they leave the public school and go to the private choice or homeschool using this program, there's no impact because those dollars are already currently being spent. They would simply follow that child through their parent.
But if a student is not enrolled in a public school today,
correct,
if this bill passes, if they've been in school for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, they can enroll for a year, and then would they be eligible?
Certainly. They have that choice if that's what they want to do.
I'm just trying to clarify. I just wanted to make sure. Okay. So second question is, I see a reference to ensuring that low-income families are made aware of the program. Are there special provisions for low-income families?
No, there's not. What we wanted to do is just make sure that we use all the demographics, all the information, make everybody aware of this particular program, but there's no means testing or income testing in this particular bill.
Thank you.
Anything else, Representative Flood?
No, thank you.
Okay. Representative Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question, Chairman Hamilton, is who will control the operation of the monies and the whole program? Should students decide to leave the public schools and take this money with them, and whether they go to private school or homeschool or whatever they do, who will control this whole operation?
We've set it up so that GOSA, the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, would basically write the rules and regulations and the procedures, come up with the application, those types of things. And we've allocated in there that we estimate, based on what we've heard in Arizona and Florida, we've said that up to 3% of the state dollars will go there to pay for the administration of this. And so what we've said is they would create all the details and the specificity, and we put requirements in here for the accountability and in a variety of things, but we've also left it open enough so that they would make those determinations. And we also recognize that there's going to be a cost associated with that, so we put a small amount in there.
And you also mentioned that a student or a child could leave the public school, go to a private environment, and go back to the public school environment?
They could, but the funding would cease at that time. It's one of those situations where it's written so that if you are qualified, you're eligible, and you leave the public school system and you go to this program, whether it's private school or homeschooling, then you are deemed to be in that program, and you will be in that program, eligible for that program to receive that money until such time that you graduate, until such time as you determine that you want to come back to the public school system, or for some reason you drop out and quit going. And so there's attendance reporting requirements, those types of things, and so it only follows you as long as you're outside the public school system. So if you did this for 2 years, and I use that as an example of my children when they were they went from one to the other. And so if a child is in the public school system, they go to the private school system or homeschool, the money follows them, and then at some point in time, if the parents make the decision for them to come back to the public school system, then the funding would end at that time and go back to the public school system.
And I would assume the purpose for a program like this is to, and all parents, I know all parents want the best for their children. So my child is in a poor-performing school, so I want to move my child from this environment and put them in a better environment to help them educationally, and so put them in a private environment. So take this money and do this, and realizing that this may not be enough to pay for it, but most of us that will do that probably have enough money to pay for them in a private environment anyway, and we just need this money to help out. But do you feel that something like this will encourage us to make that move a lot faster?
Well, I think what I want to do is provide an opportunity, a pathway, as I said, with some financial assistance. And so several scenarios are first of all, I think I've said every time, I'm very, in my area, I'm very happy with the public school system. This is not an anti-public school system bill, but even myself and some of my friends have chosen, even though we have a great school system, to send their kids to either private school or to homeschool for a whole variety of reasons. One, it could be that they do not think that the school or the teacher or whatever scenario they're in is meeting the needs of their child, and so this would be an option there. Another would be that there's some additional training that they might need. You know, there's this idea that or it'd be possible that bullying, as an example. You know, we've got situations right now we're constantly talking about bullying, and people are leaving schools for a whole host of reasons. It could be from an educational standpoint, it could be from a social issue, or those types of things, and we're simply trying to give them another opportunity for that. Important to remember that this can also be used for, even if your child goes to private school, it doesn't have to be spent on the tuition. It could be spent on testing, counseling, tutoring, digital learning through the charter schools that currently, right now we have private school students that purchase digital learning through our charter school system. And so this just allows them to have that opportunity and offer some financial assistance in doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Battles.
Thank you. Chairman Hamlin, I have a question, and that is, it's somewhat of a question of administration. And I'm thinking about the application process. Say that there is a family that has 3 children in school at the same time, and they determine that they want to go the direction that you are describing. Is there consideration of the family as a whole in that application process, or is it one of the children's got to, I'm picking one and not getting the other. I'm just wondering.
Sure.
That would probably play out more times than not. Could you kind of speak to that?
Sure. What I would tell you is that's the particular rules that we're leaving up to the Governor's Office of Student Achievement to determine the qualifications of those. However, I'll say we wrote into this because there were so many people initially that, and I don't agree, but we went ahead and addressed it anyway, was that this is going to be oversubscribed, that 8,500 is not a high enough cap. And so we put a provision in there that there's a lottery system. So you have basically open, those seats are available, but should you reach capacity, then it reverts to a lottery system to do that. So my assumption would be on that particular thing is that GOSA would determine, do they want to give preferential treatment to a family member or multiple family members? That's not in the bill. But then if it does get to an oversubscribed situation, then it would revert to a lottery system.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Buckner.
I thought I heard you say that this doesn't have a negative funding impact for the public schools, but what I think I know about public school funding is that it's based on the number of students in the school. So if you alter the number of students in the school by them pulling out, and you require that school to then make copies of the records to send with that child wherever it's going to school, which has some expense involved with that, I'm having trouble understanding how it will not have a financial impact on the public school.
Sure. Let me address it this way. The school that child is going to continue to receive local property tax dollars. It's going to continue to receive any federal dollars that might be associated, because you're going to count that child in that system. Yet you will not have to educate that child. There will be no cost associated other than whatever brick and mortar costs that are associated with that. And so there are people that will tell you that they think in some cases this is actually going to be a windfall for certain local school districts, because basically you no longer have the cost of doing that. And so I can't tell you that there's not some administrative making copies of records or something, but in the overall scheme of things, I think that's very, very small and minor. And if you look at the fact that there's some data that suggests they actually make money on the deal because they no longer have to educate that child, and all they're leaving is the state portion.
May I follow up? The county I reside in has one school, K through 12. So if I didn't want my child to go to that school and I wanted it to go to a neighboring school, then the expense of my child being in that neighboring school would have to be picked up by someone. Who would pick up that expense if my money's staying in my resident school system?
Well, the point is your cost in some form or fashion. You're going to have lower costs, just as you talked about the cost of doing records and stuff. Well, the simple reality is if you have one less student in a seat, there's going to be potentially lower costs associated with that. And so we're only taking the state portion. The local funding is still going there. And so you're, in that particular case, your actual local funding per child goes up.
But it's an expense for where the child goes.
Well, the expense is then borne by the parent for whatever school system. I mean, whatever, if they go public, if they go private, then the parents are going to have to pick up whatever incremental dollars associated with that. If they homeschool, the parent is going to be responsible.
What happens if they go public? That's the part I'm not clear on.
Oh, if they go public, this doesn't apply. You have to leave the public. I'm sorry, I misunderstood
Totally
that.
leave it from
you have
one
to totally
system
leave,
to another.
and charter schools are public schools, by the way, so as you so well know. So this is only if you leave the public school system is this eligible for you.
Totally. So
Totally.
it can't be from one county
Nope.
to another.
No. I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Okay, Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Hamilton.
Good afternoon.
What is your extent? What is the extent of your background in public education?
My extent in public education is that I have 3 children that participated in the public education system, and I participated in the public education system, but I certainly do not claim to be an authority whatsoever. Never confess that at all.
You could have fooled me. But anyway, a long story short, as someone who did 32 years as an educator in the public school system in Chatham County, and who sent his kids to private school.
Right.
And I said it before, and I'll say it again. When you decide to send your kid to private school, you're sending to a private school where a select group of kids can only come. Everybody can't go to a private school. And I'm concerned that we're using this private school, especially since we have the Gold Scholarship program. I think we're just taking it a bit too far. We got to look at the total number of kids. Because if you look at the total number of kids in public school, it totally outweighs those that are in private school. And as I said before, it's a decision you and your family make when you take your kids out of public school and put them in private schools. My kids never went to public school. They went to private school. That was money that we had to pay out of our pockets because it was a decision we made. Because the government makes funds available for your kids to get an education. If you decide you want them to go somewhere else, that's fine. But I think that what we're doing now is, and we're dressing up a voucher and making it look like a scholarship. It's not. It's a voucher. And if you can afford to send your kids to private school, you don't need a voucher.
Well, I would say that there are people out there that currently can afford to send their kids to private school without any financial assistance. I would agree with you 100%. And one of the reasons we changed the bill to eliminate kindergartners and first graders is because there was a concern that parents that were going to already send their children to private school would simply see this as a funding. And so we changed that. We took that out instead. And what I would tell you is that if I'm a parent and I have the money to send my kids to a private school, I'm not sure that it makes a lot of sense for me to send them to public school for 1 year just to save some money. That goes against the reasons that I'd want to do that. And so I think the other thing I say is that most parents in this state, I fully believe, will not take advantage of this. Because why? Because they're happy with the public school system. They like the ability to put their kids on a school bus or put them in their car, send them and come home, and they're happy with that. And so that's not the parents that I want. I know the times that we spent money for private school and or paid tutoring, you know what it was? It was work. We as parents had to put additional hours into our kids' education. So that's the thing I want to make everybody on this committee understand. Is I think that most people will choose not to do this. But just as today we passed in the House a piece of legislation that we're taking refugee parents and giving them that ability of choice, that's what we're doing here. We're simply saying here's an alternative pathway for parents that want to exercise that ability.
Why not use the Gold Scholarship? We just passed increasing the cap on Gold Scholarships, and a lot of schools use the private schools use it. And I know Bethesda school in Chatham County use it, and it's a thing not only that everybody benefit from because you get a tax break as well as providing extra funds for these private schools to bring in kids. So I'm kind of confused here. We got the Gold Scholarship, which we're giving a huge tax break to the citizens of Georgia, huge, and we expanded this year. I voted for it, and I'm having concerns that if you come in, if we grant you this voucher, somebody's gonna come along with a better voucher than yours, and it's just setting a trend. That's what I'm concerned about. This setting a trend. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I appreciate your concern, and I will respectively not call it a voucher. I'll also say that the Gold Scholarship, as you stated, not only did it sell out in one day, but it also has to go to private schools. It doesn't really give the full parental choice. This allows for homeschooling, for other components of a child's education. Thank you.
We still have a lot of blinking lights, so I'm going to ask the committee members, if they will, is to as much as possible ask questions. And Chairman Houston.
I'm just trying to figure out exactly how this works. So you put money in an account, and say I'm homeschooling my child, and I'm buying books. Do I send the bill to the state, and then the state pays the bill for the books? I mean, did I
No.
send the receipt? Who
No,
pays it?
It's a great question, and the way that, there's initial startup period, and then there's once you get up and running. Once you get up and running, the intention is you have all of these approved products, services, all the various things that are approved by GOSA, and then you receive a electronic card that through codes, only things that are approved are allowed to be taken out of there. So basically, you almost, it's the same as having almost a debit card that you can use. You can't go just to a store or give it to somebody. It's only electronically approved. Initially starting, then there might be some approval process or turn some receipts in during those early days of trying to get this thing going. But ultimately, it's an we want to move when the volume is right. It's an electronic approval process. And it's consumer driven. So for example, if GOSA approves all accredited, let's say, for example, accredited curriculum and schools and that type of thing. But then a parent comes up and says, you know what, here's an online course that would be appropriate for my child. Then they have the ability to take that course, give it to GOSA so that they would go through an approval process. And so the point is, it's really consumer driven, again, because the parent knows best what's for that child.
What about on the speech pathologist? I thought they pay for. Do you pay Medicaid rate, or what rate do you pay for a speech pathologist?
That's a GOSA thing. I don't have any idea.
I mean, you couldn't just pick your own speech pathologist.
No, GOSA has to approve. So, and we put in there that there's an approval process for both certified tutorers. There's a process that you go through. And the idea is we're not trying to exclude people. We want to eventually build this up so that you give more choices to the parents.
Thank you.
Representative Mosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Simple question. Have you heard from the educational associations, the school boards, those folk like that about
Absolutely.
the impact on this bill?
And I made 18 changes in the first bill as a result of all of those things, while simultaneously they still said we could never support this bill.
Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I apologize because it's the first time I've really seen this bill. I haven't been in committee, and so this is just looking through the bill and direct some very specific questions. On page around 139, I noticed you had invoked the certified public accountants. I appreciate that. Anything we can be helpful, I really do appreciate it. But on a serious note, in reading this, it appears that what's being done is trying to qualify participating schools, but usually when the state allocates or appropriates dollars to governmental entities or whatever, there's an audit on the back end. And so I'm not sure how you're going to audit the users, in other words, of the schools. I don't see an audit provision in here on the back end.
Let me say, first of all, that section right there, participating schools, is currently what we're doing with other private schools. In other words, it's the same standard that we are qualifying accredited schools today. And so, for example, the special needs and the gold scholarship, it's the same language as there. So this is nothing new. This is the existing what we're doing elsewhere.
And I understand that. I just looking at the dollar amounts, I was very cautious. But
Sure.
But the second thing is on line 93. I want to make sure I understand this. It says upon high school graduation, the participating student, an amount not to exceed the total of the prior year's deposit shall roll over and may be used for post-secondary education. So I guess my question there is if we're appropriating at the state level, and this is going out, I assume, through the QBE formula, but we've got money that's going to be rolling over to higher ed, that sort of gives me a little bit of pause, because we need not to allocate any more money. I mean, we need to control higher ed, secondary education from our budgeting process and Regents versus letting out through there. And then I guess my question is there restrictions? Because if I go back to the definition of eligible post-secondary institution, means a community college, accredited university, or accredited private post-secondary institution, are they going to be allowed to take this money out of state?
Let me answer tell you a couple things. First of all, we originally had it that it just continued. We put the cap in there so it was, when you graduate, it's never more than whatever that most recent year is. And so we've limited the amount. We also think that it gives you the ability for dual enrollment for other things, and so it doesn't have to go to a university. It could be someone that, and we've also put a 2-year cap on it, that if you don't touch that money in 2 years, the money rolls back to the state. And then the final point is, this is money that would have been spent in K-12 anyway, so it's not like it's extra money or anything, and we're trying to incentivize parents to choose their dollars very carefully on how they spend those dollars. And so, as far as, did I miss anything?
I think that's largely covered.
Yeah. And so, could they roll that into a community college or whatever? Sure, they could, or the parent could choose to spend it that way. Again, it has to be approved through GOSA.
Did you address the out-of-state?
It'd be my guess that GOSA would have that ability to determine whether that was an approved expenditure. Because remember, the money has to go to only things that GOSA has approved. And I know there's always that concern, but the reality is there really going to be much money there to roll over? I don't know.
Chairman Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to get the dimensions of this in terms of the caps and the way it works. When you say 1%, or I think in the first year is it 0.5%, right, and it doesn't include kindergarten, how many kids would that be? About
8,500.
8,500 total kids.
Presently,
okay,
it'd be about 8,500 students or scholarship, however you want to look at it.
And if they maxed out on the state portion, how much would that be?
Well, whatever $4,400
times 8,500.
8,500 would be
fairly insignificant amount, in other words, in terms of the overall education budget, right, in the state.
And it's money that would have already been spent anyway.
Okay. And so if I'm got a kid in private school, do you have any idea what the average private school cost would be?
It's all over the board.
Range.
Oh, I would think that there's some that are $10,000 and $20,000 a year, and there's some that are probably 6 or 8.
Okay, but the point here is that the state portion of the FTE cost per year is substantially lower than what. In other words, the parents still have a lot of skin in the game in terms of paying for that private school.
Absolutely.
Cost over and above.
Both financially as well as their effort.
Okay, and my kids have some kids they're homeschooling. Then the charges they could apply to this would be for books, any kind of software or things like that. But the point here is that's probably minimal in terms of the cost, particularly for a homeschooler. Wouldn't you think?
Well, it depends on what they want to do.
Maybe some tutoring or something like that,
tutoring,
or King's Academy or something like that.
SAT testing, a whole variety of things. If they decide that they wanted to specialize in a particular curriculum that is through an online learning program, they pay for those. But so I'm not an expert on those. Right. Know what those cost.
So the max here, could be well below the $4,000 that a student would be applicable to in terms of the state portion of the FTE cost.
Well, the money would go into their account.
Sure. The whole thing?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And they draw down on that, and then
Draw
anything
down.
that's left over, they can use in a post-secondary type of a situation,
No,
right?
not anything. Anything that's not used in 1 year rolls over to the following year.
Okay,
That continues, but when you graduate, you can only roll over 1 year, maximum
I got
1
it.
year. And the other thing to keep it, at any point, if you have no activity for 2 years, the money goes back to the state.
okay. Thank you.
Representative Teasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My wife and I, a number of years ago, got involved when we were first self-employed, got a health savings account through in our insurance plan. As I understand what the ESA is very similar, where we were allowed to put of our own money, or if we had an employer that would put money in for us, that's money that we could spend on health care costs. Are you familiar with the HSA plan? And
Yes, but this doesn't allow you to put money into the
Right.
account. This is money
I
that the
understand
state dollars go there. Right.
But philosophically, the idea of being able to spend money on your own health expenses
Right.
is similar here, where you might be able to spend money on your own education expenses.
That's correct, and I call it consumer-driven because you're allowing that person
That's
to
right.
maximize. And so, in one of the other examples where the costs were higher than what this was, it's up to the parent to make those tough choices on what they will and will not spend their money on.
And I thank you for that, because that's actually where I was driving to, because it turned my wife and I back into consumers again as it related to our health costs, because we began calling and saying, well, what program do we get for doing this? And, what does this cost, and how much is this going to cost our family? Because we were turned back into consumers, and I think that was a healthy thing. And, Mr. Chairman, whenever it is appropriate, I'd like to make a motion.
Well, we're getting close. Representative Flood, you are permitted one more question, and we are not starting over going around the room again. This is the last one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hamilton, you mentioned that there is no fiscal impact. That's why we don't have a fiscal note. Is that correct?
Right.
So I don't see where this raises any revenue. I don't see where this gives the parents any special tax treatment. We're dealing with education policy. Why is this bill in Ways and Means Committee?
Because it's a fiscal note. Originally, when it did, there was a potential fiscal note associated with this, but we have taken that out.
So you took the fiscal impact away.
Right. In the subcommittee, committee sub that we did.
And this is an education policy bill.
I don't see this as education policy. I think this is a parental choice given
That
parents.
is two past your one. All right, one last question, Chairman Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hamilton, just real quick, I mean, the goal of this is to provide parents with a choice of what's in the best interest of their education of their children. Is that right? That's the end game of what you're trying to get to here.
That's the absolute
to give parents a
end
choice.
game. That's right.
Yeah.
You know about that with a little House Bill 1 out
Sure.
there,
Yeah.
giving
Yeah.
parents the opportunity to, and not a slam on education. Sometimes parents know the best for their children,
Right.
and this is simply giving them a pathway if they want to exercise that.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
All right, that's all the questions. What's the pleasure of the committee? All right, there's a motion and a second to pass. Discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. It moves on to rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate it.
You want that? All right, Chairman Stevens is not here, so Vice Chairman Peake, are you going to present this bill 308?
Yes, I will.
Okay. He's here if you want him.
Oh.
I was just about to present your bill, Chairman Stevens, but I'll be more than glad to defer back to you. So, if whatever the chairman says. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the mega historic rehabilitation bill. It has been worked on extensively, cuts down the cap for this rehab on these major projects to an annual cap of $5 million, total cap of $25 million. Keeps a reporting piece in there for the number of jobs creating, even though it's not required by the bill itself. And essentially that's what it does. We have a $250 million project down in Savannah that's waiting on some of the outcomes of this. And we do have buy-in from the locals. There's several, about 11 million committed in the city of Savannah. And it's a big deal. I'll accept any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Are there questions? It is the proper time, Representative Stevens. Representative Stevens, you may make a motion.
I move that we pass it out as due pass.
Second. All right, there's a motion and a second due pass. Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes on the rules. I think somebody was going to present Darlene Taylor's bill. Paul, were you going to present Darlene Taylor's bill? Who was going to present it? I think Alan Peake. $426.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 426 is Darlene Taylor's bill, which basically provides, reinstates the sales tax exemption for community health clinics, community health centers that have been a huge asset in our state and continue to provide health care to a lot of citizens in our state that wouldn't be able to get it otherwise. And so this bill just reinstates the sales tax exemption for these Georgia health centers.
All right, this is a committee substitute, and if you will look at line 43 through 53, and at the top of that page, 27 through 35, we put in some metrics so that we can track employment and investment, and also the number of patients seen, et cetera. And we also did there's a fiscal note, which I think you've all got in front of you, which indicates a cost of somewhere between $1.15 million to $2.29 million, which was a little bit higher than we anticipated. But we also ran, based on the presenter's information about the commitment to hire additional employees and what that would mean as far as income taxes paid on those employees and the number of patients those employees would see, and the cost savings by seeing that number of patients by those employees, that there's actually a $4.3 million positive impact. And so when you net those two together, you've got the positive impact of approximately $2 million. So I'd be happy to share that with anybody that's on the committee, but I think everybody's got the fiscal note. Are there questions of the substitute author? Well, I see no questions. Let's see there. Chairman House.
I want to make a motion at the proper time.
Well, I think you've been one-upped by Chairman Battles.
Okay.
Well, I defer to the lady. If, I'll second that.
It's nice to be wanted, I can tell you that.
Well, let's don't fight over it, but one of you make a motion.
Okay, I move do pass on House Bill 426 substitute.
All right, and we're working off of
LC 344612S.
Correct. And Chairman Houston. Okay, we got a motion and a second. Do pass. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes on to rules. Okay. Let's see the pen. Mr. Hatchett, come see us and tell us about 496. Yes.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you its House substitute for House Bill 496, LC 344607S. It involves CUVA and solar farms. What it does is allow, if you have property that is under the CUVA stipulations, then you can carve out the area that you want to make a solar farm, and it lets the other property still remain under CUVA. The property that the solar farm is on would be taxed at the going fair market value. It doesn't have a state impact, but it helps the locals.
That was a pretty good bill last year. I don't know about this year.
It was House Bill 757, and the chairman of the committee was the author of the bill. So. And it passed the House last year. It got bogged down in the last day things at the Senate last year. So.
Okay. Any questions of the author?
There's no penalty for that portion that's carved out?
No.
Are they? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Representative Carson.
Thank you, Chairman Hatchett. Is this? I missed what you said. Is this exactly like Chairman Powell's bill from last year, or was there some changes made?
If you look at the bill that I actually introduced, line 15, 16, and 17, there's a sentence that dealt with energy being consumed on site or transmitted by the property owner. The power generators in the state asked that we get rid of that sentence, and right there on line 15 of the substitute after electricity, and just add and say that it can be sold as allowed by law, applicable law.
And that's the only change?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? What's the pleasure of the committee? All right, there's a motion and a second to do pass. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes on to rules.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Those are all the bills that we had on the committee agenda today, so this was the last committee meeting, and until the next one is scheduled. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.